will just accept the questions from the floor, and I've got a few by text, but since Zena put her hand up so quickly, Kanzi.
I'm not talking about secular. So the question is, Zena says, I mentioned in my speech, is when did Muslims digress, or when did they, when did they really lose their standing historically? Was it before? Was it a colonisation? That's the question. Is that when they became more secular?
Yeah, do you mean in the true sense, or in the sense that Muslims like all their values in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking in terms of when I say they lost, is more of their influence in the world on a global level. Is that it was way before then. I mean, you see that there was, the colonial powers that came in, and then when the Muslims countries became more secular, it was very, very, rotten from the inside way before then. I mean, I've studied a bit of Moroccan history, really. That's where I can speak from. Like you're looking hundreds of years before even colonisation. You can see that weaknesses were there within Muslim countries, and that there was a lot of corruption. And the colonial powers at the time took full advantage of that, and they exploited that and took over the countries. And so I'm not blaming colonial powers. They just saw they saw the opportunity. It's when Muslims really lost touch with what their religion means. Because when did they flourish? Within 100 years, Arabs, I'm talking about the Arabs that were in the backwaters of history, no one really saw them as significant. They suddenly just burst forth without any precedent. And people were just baffled at how that was. And they can continue to grow and grow and grow and grow, and spread their teachings. And then all of a sudden, you see in history, they started retreating. And so obviously there's ups and downs within the history. It's a huge history. We're talking 1,400 years or more. And so obviously it's easy to generalise. But you can see, if you study historically, that when they turned away from the principles of their religion, that they started to lose their grip. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah.
Yes. So Salim's question is basically, how do we apply this in our lives? And it's very, very difficult. Obviously, it's easy to understand it on an intellectual and cognitive level. But is that your question? Yeah. So how do we practice that with our families? Well, our families, especially when we talk about parents and siblings, they're the hardest to deal with. Why? Because we've got so much baggage. Have you noticed? Like, I've got a southern accent. I'm from Kent, if anyone knows Kent. My accent, generally, when I'm up north here, I speak like this. I don't know if you can tell me, I've got a bit of an accent. Well, have you noticed that when I go home and I speak to my dad, I sound like a proper Cockney? Have you noticed even your accent, you just go into habitual reactions? Like, I had a friend at school, he was from Glasgow, but he was brought up in Kent. He had a proper southern accent. As soon as he spoke to his parents on the phone, what happens? He went into a proper Glaswegian, thick accent. And so we have little control, a lot of the time, over our reactions with our family. That's the point I'm making. I go back home and I meet my family. It's the most stressful time of my life dealing with my parents. I'm like, I act so cool in front of you guys. That's because you don't know me and we don't have any background. As soon as I go home, I get panic attacks just going home. I'm like, oh God, I've got to face mum and dad, got to face my sister, and so forth. And it really bothered me, because when I became a Muslim, I got really stressed, because I said, but my religion is teaching me to be good to my family. I should show a better example. But when I go back, I find it really difficult. Like, I understand cognitively that I should be polite, but I'm going back into all these mechanical habits. So how do we change that? Okay, it takes effort. And what's one of the beauties about us is that we actually leave our families, is that we get the ability to try to be someone we want to be. That's why I say when we get married, and that's why I say don't live with your parents when you get married. You want to be able to change. And so that you're marrying someone who you don't know, and a lot of Muslims, they don't know. There's a joke I saw, it says this father's turning to his boy, and his boy says, Dad, in some countries they marry women that they don't even know before they marry. He says, son, that's all of us. You don't know someone until you live with them. And so, that's the beauty of marriage for us. Because you get to be someone you want to be, and they don't judge you. You know when you go back home, you try to be pious, Salim, and you say, oh, come on, Salim. We know what you were like. Don't try to be someone you're not. but you are trying to be someone. And it's really funny is that we feel we're fake when we're trying to be something we want to be. That's not fake, that's just you being uncomfortable. Like, for example, say you become a car salesman. You've got to be fake. In order to, if you're going to slap you on the back and say, oh, you like this Rolls Royce? Yeah, it's pretty, and you act normally. You can't act normally. You've got to, obviously, you've got skills you've got to develop in order to try to sell that. So is that being fake? No, that's you're trying to achieve a goal. And so who are we? That's the question. Is it our feelings and emotions and habits? That's not who we are. Because God, we're damned if that's us. And so someone should never feel like that. I feel like, and in marriage therapy, when we're trying to change back people's habits, that's always the question. I feel like I'm being fake. But that's not you. Your behaviour shouldn't define who you are. As long as you keep doing them, it will define who you are. But you can change them. How do you do it? And this is very interesting when I deal with therapy, is that your body works bottom up, not up bottom. Does that make sense? I'll clarify, is that you can understand something cognitively, that's your up, but your body's not acting in accordance with. You can speak to yourself all the time cognitively, and this is why I'm not, I'm more into body therapy, where you basically get in tune with your body. Because you might, for example, say, the doctor's told me that chocolate's bad, and I've got diabetes. And you say, yes, it's not bad, it's bad, and do all the cognitive therapy on yourself you can do. But as soon as you get those hunger pangs, what happens? Who's telling you to eat that chocolate? It's not this. What is it? Your body. And this is when we do, when I do therapy with people, I practice something called somatic experiencing. If anyone's heard it, or trauma release exercises. It's your body that defines, that dictates what you're actually going to do a lot of the time. It shouldn't be the case, but it is a lot. And so we should try to teach people to get in tune with their bodies, and when their bodies feel that you're actually you're meeting their needs, then your brain follows suit. And so a lot of the time we've just got to be peace in our bodies and accept that we're not feeling comfortable. We shouldn't force things when they're not happening for us. For example, you go home for Eid, a festival, whatever, you're feeling really anxious. Just take some time out and just relax and just accept that you're feeling anxious and you're finding it difficult to interact with Uncle Kabir, or whatever his name is, Auntie Kubra and Sugra, whatever that I'm struggling, and I accept that I struggle, and I'm going to be at peace. Working with sensations. This work that I did in therapy, working with bodily sensations, revolutionised my relationships. It revolutionised my worship. Because a brother asked me just before this, how do you stop thinking in prayer? You've got an overactive mind and you're disassociated from your body. So you've got to get in tune with your sensations. And what's amazing about sensations are bodily sensations, like, for example, heat, heaviness, tingling, bodily sensations, is if you're in tune with your sensations, you're present in the moment. When you're in your thoughts a lot of the time, you're somewhere else. Thoughts are usually future and past. They're not present. When you tune in with your sensations, you're present in the moment. And that's what the believer wants to be. He wants to be present, engaged in the moment. When you accept that you're present in the moment on a sensational level, and you accept what you're feeling, and you don't judge yourself and so forth, and you're at peace with yourself, even if you're having an anxiety attack, you can be at peace with yourself. You say, it's happening and I'm okay with it. Then you can actually deal with the situation you're in front of, and it generally subsides there. All suffering, and this is why I think our religion, obviously I'm speaking as a Muslim, is so amazing. All suffering in life comes from what? Resistance. This is in Buddhism, they have this as well, in Hinduism as well. All suffering comes through resisting the reality of your situation, things that you're not in control of. What's our religion called? Islam. And what's Islam mean? In active submission you find wholeness and peace. Our religion, its very title, sums up where all suffering comes. If you can accept your circumstances, we're not talking about people who are abused, where you can actually assert yourself, obviously we're not talking about, but the reality is, if you resist the situation you're in and deny it, you're going to suffer, you're not going to feel nice. When you come to accept it and empower yourself, then you can do something about the situation. And so that's what our religion means. active submission, not passive. Someone smacks you around the face and you say, I'll be at peace with this. We're not talking about that sort of peace. You know, we throw him a flower and say, peace, man. I love you, and give him a hug and a kiss. No, you've got to assert your boundaries sometimes, healthy boundaries. But by accepting the circumstances, it's raining. What are you going to do about it? You know, as us English people, what is it? In the weather, lousy. How depressing! What are you going to do about it? You know, but you accept what the circumstances are, and you be at peace with yourself. That's where you and you submit to that. You find you feel wholeness in your very being. You're an integrated human being, and you find peace, and you're able to actually make an impact on the world around you. As long as you don't have that, you're going to mess up the world if you try to change the world. And isn't that relevant for today? Because all these people, if you want to say people who think people who assume they represent Islam, ISIS and these groups, they're traumatized human beings. You go through what they went through, and it's not justifying their acts, but they're traumatized. They've seen horrific things happen. And people that have gone through trauma and gone through such experiences, they generally, if they don't deal with it internally, they will wreak the same havoc that they're experiencing internally on the world around them. So don't be surprised at what's happening. These people are traumatized human beings, but they're not acknowledging it. And that's when religion is the nastiest, when it's represented as the nastiest way, when you're dealing with people who are traumatized and using and speaking with their religion, they're clothing their trauma in religious language. They're frightening people, they are. And this is what we did. Religion is the most beautiful of things, about the ugliest of things, if it's used when people they want to actually escape from their own traumas inside, they're not willing to open up. How many people turn to religion thinking it will solve it, but when they realise they've got to actually go inside and start discovering themselves, they start using religion to disassociate, and they can't deal with it. And they're frightening human beings if it reaches an extreme. And so this is spirituality, being engaged in life and accepting who you are, and then you can engage. That's religion. Okay.
Whenever somebody says something against Islam or things about episodes of Paris or whatever, you get most people all around the world being angry.
Which doesn't help, does it? But sorry, I forgot your name. Shahnawaz was saying that we, obviously Muslims generally, get angry when they see some Muslims carry out a horrific thing, they get angrier as well. And so often we exasperate the circumstances. We make things worse. We've got and non-Muslims. They're not justified, but it's acceptable that they will obviously look at Muslims' behaviour and they will say, "This is Islam." Well, you're Muslims, you know. So that's obviously we assume this is Islam, and so that obviously we shouldn't. If I think, I'm sure there's some lovely Leeds United supporters. But they're not, they've not got a good reputation. I don't know what they're like now. I'm not really following football these days. But back when I was into football, they had Galatasaray. When they went over to Turkey, they shamed them. Does that represent Leeds United? I don't know. So it's normal. People will say that these guys are a bunch of thugs. If that's what Islam is, obviously that's not Islam. We know that. I think the non-Muslims know that really. If they've just done a little bit of research on the history, the contribution to history Islam has given, you can't deny that. Okay, yeah. Sorry, Shanaz, do you have another point?
Some people do it intentionally to actually elicit such behaviour. Because they know that these guys are short fused.
Well, what's the hardest thing? Like Shanawaz says, often both parties just rub each other up the wrong way, and that's easy to do. We do that to our own families. This is what I'm trying to talk about. What's the hardest step and the most productive step is, look, if I've got an argument with someone and we're not happy, what's your beef with me? What's the issue? And how do I feel about that? This is how I feel, how do you feel? Okay, how can we accommodate one another in the world? What's the positives and negatives of taking this step? What's the positives and negatives of taking this step? Just sit down at the table and start negotiating. But that's too painful because people have their inner traumas. and we've been mature adults and sit down without getting a bit upset. You know, I remember when I first became Muslim, I couldn't even step forward and lead people in prayer without having an anxiety attack. I started because I was so nervous. If you're in that state, don't come forward and start debating trying to negotiate with people because you mess it up. You're not balanced in yourself. And so it's important that as a Muslim community, we push forward examples, people that are intellectual and they can express themselves so that people can understand the concerns of the Muslim community and get everyone just to calm down and throw a bucket of water over them.
So, a question by text.
Hit me.
If Muhammad was such a great man and messenger, what was the need for all the prophets before him?
What was the need for the prophets before him? Yeah, we believe from an Islamic point of view is, so did everyone get the question? So if he was such a great person, what was the need for the prophets before? Well, as we say, save the best for last. Good understanding. What we do as Muslims, obviously the other faiths would disagree, but we believe him to be the greatest of prophets, and we say that his legacy stands for that. It displays that, in that he's how it spread Islam, and how it's still very relevant for us today, his teachings. Whilst the other prophets, we understand that God sent prophets to every community. And then those teachings became corrupted, and there was a need to send another prophet in order to bring back the pristine teachings. It's like you having Microsoft 2000, and I don't know, gets corrupted, people figure out how to, so they have to send another Microsoft, whatever, Windows, whatever it is. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's the Mac. Okay, they say the Mac's the best, and once you've got a Mac, that's all you need. Okay, that's how we see it as Muslims. But you appreciate the Mac because you've been on all the other systems, and you say, now I've got no bugs in this computer, and it's not slowed down. So you really appreciate it. Obviously, we also understand is that the other prophets were sent to specific communities, while we understand the Prophet being sent to the whole of humanity. And so we see that the other prophets, their teachings weren't relevant to other peoples, and that's why we believe from an Islamic stance, is that Jesus, he was sent to the people of Israel, the children of Israel, and his teachings weren't intended for the Gentiles, and that's why, obviously, Paul had to do what he did, and he's obviously, really in reality, he's the biggest influence on Christianity historically. And so, but we believe as Muslims, it's the Prophet that has to establish the teachings and give a guidance whereby people have clarity in all their affairs. We believe as Muslims, very similar to Jews in that extent, that the scholars, they addressed every aspect of life. And so we believe that Islam can address all those issues from a general sense and from a detailed sense as well. Does that answer the question?
Whilst I respectfully disagree with your statement about Macs, but we'll do that later.
I don't like Macs anyway, because I don't have a decent Arabic program, and I can't type, they're causing problems. Go on, it's been there.
So we maybe covered this slightly before, but let's just get a quick answer for it. Can you completely judge who a person is from who they are at home? Many people are different people outside the home. So why is it?
That's the problem.
Why is one more important than the other, and is one more important than the other?
So why is it more important? Because it's very easy to be nice to strangers, because we don't have the emotional baggage. But it's when there's a really interesting article. It's called Spiritual Bypassing. It's about a 20-page article. I encourage everyone to read it, because being non-Muslim, it's coming from a Buddhist perspective, so there's a lot of Buddhist terminology in it. He says that it's when we're with the people most dearest to us, closest to us, that's when our issues come up. That are internal, personal issues that we need to deal with. And we can either deal with them or we can actually cover them over. But when we cover them over, they actually start emerging in really dysfunctional, childish ways. When you start screaming and shouting and acting like really immature, and that usually happens with the people closest to you. So it's who you are closest to, you really get an idea of who you are. People outside, it's easy to put on airs. I'm speaking personally. It's easy for me to be lovely to you guys. I don't know who you are, and you don't trigger the little things in me that would get me. But your families trigger them usually because you've got a past with them. And so when you actually, things you just find it really difficult. Like Salim was saying, it's not even cognitive. You just get really upset with them, and you can't control it. And it can get frustrating. As for strangers, it's very easy for people to be civil with them because they haven't got the emotional baggage with them. So if we want to deal with our emotional baggage, we need to look to see how we deal with the people closest to us. Fanda. He was saying, like you said, in Islam, men are supposed to respect their wives, and it's very different what we see in Saudi Arabia. As I said, that's a generalisation, of course. Okay, and I'm not saying that every Saudi man is nice to his wife. We'd have to get a few Saudi women in here and do a survey. I'm not going to judge them. And so it's very dangerous to make generalisations when we're talking about these sorts of issues. I do agree with you 100% that there's women in Saudi Arabia, certain laws are very, they're unjustified and they cause problems. I agree with you on that matter. And we see from the prophetic example is that he wasn't scared. His wife spoke out to him, and he wasn't scared for a woman to do that. That's what's amazing about him. That he didn't fear a woman to be able to express her opinion in front of him and stand up. In fact, Omar, there's a famous tradition where Omar, after the Prophet's demise, after he passed away, he tried to limit the dawah. In Islam we have a dawah. Not a dowry, because a dowry was a woman gives to a man. I think in Hindu culture they have this on marriage. A dowry is what a man gives to his wife. It's like a token of affection to say, I'm going to protect you, I'm your provider. That's what the dowry is. And he tried to limit the dowries because people were trying to, his fathers were trying to have huge extortionate dowries. And he tried to limit it, and a woman stood up in the mosque and basically said, you're not allowed to do that. God doesn't give you permission to limit. And he says, Omar's wrong and the woman's right. And he was a very stern character, Omar, and so it shows that women were not, they were vocal, and the Prophet encouraged that, to the point where his wife, Aisha, she was one of the biggest scholars in the Muslim community. She narrated over 2,000 hadith traditions of the Prophet. She used to teach men, and she empowered men to go forth and establish themselves in society. And that's the greatest gift a woman can give a man, is that she makes him believe in himself. Because unfortunately, socially, men, why are they can't be emotionally intimate with their wives and stuff and their women folk? You can't blame them. Because when they were 3 or 4, as they're growing up, they were told, no, you're a boy, you don't express yourself. When his mates were around him and he said, if he were to say to his friends, when he was like 7 or 8, or even a teenager, I really respect you and I love you. Wuss. Whenever a man's tried to actually express himself in his emotions on an intimate level, he's put down. And then we expect him, once he gets married, to be able to be emotional. Women have to understand that we've never been brought up like that, a lot of us. It's a generalisation, but that's why they struggle. But when men can do that, they actually blossom as a human being. And I had to learn that through marriage. My wife radically changed me. She's a strong woman and she made me change. And I respect her and she believes in me. And so that's why I love her so much. And the Prophet ﷺ, a man came up to the Prophet and said, who's the most beloved to you? He says, Aisha, who's his wife. No. I'm not asking about that. He says, out of the men, who do you really admire and who you love? He says, her father. Notice he didn't even say his name, he said, her father. He's getting a bit frustrated now. Because you know what he wants? He wants to say, it's me. And then he said, who's after that? He said, Omar. And then he said, Uthman. No, he said, I gave up after that. I was embarrassing myself. He said. And so he wasn't ashamed to express himself publicly of his affection for his wife. And that was 1,400 years ago. And we're only just, in British society, generally, we've got big issues, I feel. I've seen from my own parents and but it's not to blame people. We're not in blaming. We're not here to blame one another. But we've got to take responsibility and admit and we can break the cycle. And we live in an age now where so much information is available for us to make those changes. It's incredible. We have what no other generation ever had in terms of access to knowledge. So we've got no excuses not to try to make our lives better on a spiritual, emotional level, on a physiological level, on a social, economical level, and on a relational level. They're the 4 paradigms. They're 4 quadrants, they call them. That this is what it has to be, this integrative approach to life. You have to deal with your emotional issues, your physical issues, your relational issues, and your economic and social issues. If you can try to work on them, you're an integrated human being and you feel whole. And that's what everyone should be passionate about doing. Yeah.
Okay, so because we're running a bit short on time, we've only got 2 more questions. First one, why should I believe any of Muhammad's claims about God? Surely not just because he seemed a nice guy.
Well, if you don't want to believe, you don't believe. It's not. No one's here forcing you to believe anything. But he obviously, what I'm saying is, we're not forcing, as Muslims, we're just saying, look, I know we're a bit lousy in our interactions sometimes, don't always mean it, and, but for your own sake, read about him and see what you think about him. But it's Islam, we're not into converting people. We're into exposing them to the message. And we don't, and in this day and age, we don't need, things with different approaches for different times. Today, it's in our own well-being as human beings living together that we appreciate one another. I like to know about Hinduism, I like to know about Buddhism, I'd like to know about atheism and their approaches and so forth, to get an understanding of where they come from. Why should we be scared about understanding and opening up and to trying to understand? I've got no issue. And so, I'm confident and I'm grounded and, I'm happy in my religion. And each to their own. So I hope that answers the question.
Final question. That was more, could be quick, so we might actually have time for a third. What is the most important lesson one should take from Muhammad, peace be upon him?
This is the message I taught tonight, I think. What's the most important message we can take from him? Is that he managed to achieve things, and he made a success. And what's the key? I like to study self-development and this character development courses and stuff. And one of the major things that people focus on is on mirroring. In NLP, linguistic programming, they talk about mirroring. Like if you see someone achieve something, then they used an approach in order to get to that. And so look at the skills that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings, applied in his life and gave him success. And you can, if you apply those skills, you can bet your bottom dollar that probably you'll achieve something. That's what mirroring is. God has put natural laws down whereby if you take a certain approach, regardless of who you are, you're achieving. If you want to be an athlete, you look at athlete, you speak to an athlete that's successful and how did he achieve that? If you want to be a musician, you study how you sit with the musicians that's achieved it, copy him, mimic him, and when you get to a certain level, you obviously become a bit innovative and you develop your own approach. And so that's the call. And I say to Muslims often say, when we send prayers and blessings upon the Prophet, peace be upon him, how do I get his presence of being when I do that? When we say, oh God, send prayers and peace upon Muhammad and his family, we have this like an invocation, a type of dhikr, we call it, that we read to get connection to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him. I say, apply his teachings in your life, apply it in your life, realise how it's brought about change in your life and made your life more positive, and you will naturally feel presence of heart when you make that. Because when you realise what someone's done for you, it's not a cognitive exercise. You experience it with your very being. You can't help but be appreciative. If someone's done you an absolute favour, and it brought so much changes to your life, when you see them, or when you think of them, you want to read their books, you want to see them in person, you want to remember them, and you love to talk about them. And so that's the call to us as Muslims, is that, apply teachings, practical teachings in our life, reflect on the benefits, and you only be appreciative and thankful and praise him, because he's the off-praise. He's always being praised, remember, because of the good that he brought. So, like we're called, the general point is, let me is trying to say, I understand, is we're calling it, as Muslims, to dress appropriately, and so people have respect for us, and honour us. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he said that, the way you dress, if you want to get someone's respect, you dress up, you dress well and appropriately. So if you want to get a job, you go and you dress. Now, then he's saying this seems conflicting because obviously we're called not to show off. Okay? But you can dress appropriately without showing off. You can dress smart and people admire you. And that was a question that was posed to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. He called about people acting arrogantly in their dress and so forth. He says, but doesn't a believer, and this was arrogant in general, doesn't a believer love to be beautiful? And he says, I'm not talking about that. He says, I like to dress for my wife, he said. It was interesting. Okay, he said, I like to dress up for my wife and look beautiful for her. He says, that's not what I'm talking about. It's where you're basically disdaining people. That's arrogance. And we can see that, once in Keithley, I saw this guy, he had a roofless car, no top to it, and he was driving, and he was pumping Islamic songs out, and he had sunglasses, and he had these big pecs. He was going like this to the Islamic music. And I was going, that is not, that's the problem. It's that way you basically bigging it up, the gangster, And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, the Arabs used to be like that. They used to drag their garment. And why was that? To show off, because clothes were very expensive in that day and age. Really expensive. To buy a garment. Have you ever tried to buy organic handmade jumper from one of these? You're going to pay about 150 quid just for a jumper. And that's how much people it cost in those days. So he was saying, look, that was high arrogance to wait. It was someone that's wasting money. And so you were dragging this Prophet loads of money to spend. The Prophet didn't walk like that. He walked with purpose, looking down, and he controlled himself. He wasn't walking slowly around like this. And so that's what we're talking about, the gangster walk. And the Prophet, they used to even laugh at him, the Quraysh. The people, the non-Muslims, they used to say, what's this walk? Because he's not a man, But he was teaching them how to be a real man. It's not having to assert yourself like a gangster. That's actually your own insecurities there. People have to do that. Does that answer your question? Okay, I think we wrap up tonight.
Yeah, I think we have to close the questions now. Sorry if I didn't get to ask you a question. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you very much, and God bless you all. Thank you for listening.